Music is a dialogue. Let's join the conversation. This is the Tonic, a tone-base podcast. I'm Lowry Yankwich. Welcome. Before we dive in, a quick shout out that this podcast is made possible by Tonebase, a classical music education platform. All of the interviews included in this episode come directly from Tonebase lessons. Check them out at tonebase.co. Okay, let's dive in.
Debussy has many lovers and succeeded to compose simple music. He composed even hits.
This is pianist Arie Vardi and Debussy's Clair de Lune.
Every music lover will know it. On one hand, he was very conservative and very traditional. But on the other hand, he really created a whole world of new sound.
Clair de Lune is a kind of homage to the beauty of the light of the moon. Here it's played by French pianist Jean-Efflam Bavouzet.
We have the moon. We have a kind of shimmering reflection of the moon on the water. And of course, you have love.
Debussy was a master of creating these sorts of vivid, evocative, sensuous moments. It's why he's been labeled an impressionist composer, even though he rejected the term. At his best, Debussy delivers something magical.
All the senses, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you believe, everything is unified together.
There was another French composer, slightly Debussy's junior, who was also making critical innovations in music at the turn of the 20th century, Maurice Revell.
If you think of looking at paintings in the great collections of French impressionistic galleries, for example, and I think especially of Pissarro, where from a distance, it looks like beautiful people standing on a wonderful lawn.
This is pianist Gwendolyn.
And you get a little bit closer, you start to notice that their entire figure is made up of small, tiny little brushstrokes. That is how Ravel should be studied.
I've played classical piano since I was 5 years old, and yet I spent very little time with the music of Ravel and Debussy growing up. For me, Debussy was always inextricably linked with Clair de Lune. And Ravel was always the untouchable composer whose music was impossible to play. Many piano students see Ravel and Debussy as two sides of the same coin, departures from the traditional Germanic sound of Beethoven, Brahms, or Wagner, but I had never really delved into what that meant. What did they actually change in music? What was their impact? And what made them different? In this episode, we venture into the sound worlds of this odd couple of turn-of-the-century French composers, with several artists fluent in their musical language. They really opened a door for me into better understanding Debussy and Ravel's musical contributions, and I hope they'll do the same for you. Debussy's Clair de Lune is actually a good place to start.
The famous Clair de Lune. I'm very happy to talk to you about this piece today.
That's French pianist Jean-Efflam Bavouzet. He helps show how effective Debussy is at evoking a particular scene and the accompanying emotional experience.
It's referring to au clair de la lune, meaning under the light of the moon. First of all, it doesn't start on a downbeat, but it starts with 2, 3. And it's very important that we feel this feeling of not starting with a concrete downbeat like, but 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
Concrete is a good word to latch on to. Debussy avoids giving solidity to the music early on. Besides starting on an offbeat, he does it by delaying the arrival of the tonic note, D flat, in the bass. Listen again to the beginning.
The bass in the first part is going to the G and to this diminished harmony, and from here on the bass is following all notes of the D flat with the A flat here, and finally reach for the first time after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bars only we reach the bottom of the lake, or the bottom, harmonic bottom of the piece.
By delaying the arrival of that harmonic bottom of the piece, Debussy is letting the scene come slowly into focus, instead of presenting us immediately with a clear picture. Here's a part of that delayed arrival of the bass again.
That's a sound, this sound, that Debussy loves so very much, that he will use it in many pieces. The first one that comes to my mind is Reflet dans l'eau, which has also reflection in the water. But also in a contrasting way, you will have it in La Puerta del Vino, Soirée dans Grenade, or even more spectacular at the end of Feu d'Artifice. So anyway, that's a sound that Debussy likes especially.
From that combination of the low D flat and A flat, another Debussy move comes up right away, diving down to the depths of the piano, only to spring upward and high into the air. And Debussy reaches even higher a few bars later, spanning 5 octaves from low bass to high treble register on an extended harmony, a 9th chord.
It's almost as if you would say, look at the moon, look, it is so beautiful.
Arie Vardi suggests that Debussy often uses these huge contrasts in register to create a sense of magic and of space.
I remember I was once in a Swiss village and there were these Alp horns, 3 of them playing chords to say good evening.
Listen for the soft striking of the low bass note, adding a sort of atmospheric resonance to the music.
From afar.
Here, Vardi's playing from a Debussy prelude that translates as sounds and perfumes swirl around in the evening air.
The feeling of space, that the keyboard is not limited, but is expanded.
Vardi points to another piece from Debussy's second book of preludes, where he thinks the feeling of space is even greater. This is La Terrasse des Audiences du Clair de Lune, Guess what? It's also about moonlight.
It's so huge, it is so fantastic, it's like this... You can analyze Ravel very successfully, but with Debussy it is like you look at the stars and you say, well, I'm sure that there is some order there, but I never understand it. Debussy said, yes, there is a very strict rule. Listen carefully, and the ear is the best rule.
Although it can be dangerous to draw connections between composers' music and their personalities, Debussy's adherence to his inner voice feels very aligned with some of the ways in which his contemporaries described him. One contemporary noted that Debussy had categorical opinions about everything in life, and was ever a contrarian. Perhaps in part because of these inflexible preferences, Debussy struggled in the real world, tripping through a string of aborted relationships, including 2 failed marriages and numerous affairs. His circle of friends was small, and he was known for being childish at times. My favorite tidbit is that apparently he was a bad loser. He used to play cards with his friend Eric Satie, but would sometimes cheat rather than lose. One friend once questioned whether Debussy ever truly loved anything besides his music, though scholars have pointed out that he was very devoted to his daughter, Chouchou. Understanding Debussy's limits puts his music in a different light. It seems like no coincidence that his music is often described as creating a sort of dream world. Music was his escape. He wrote that, quote, "In real life, I can't live up to the ideas I have in music. I feel the difference there is in me between Debussy the composer and Debussy the man." In certain ways, Ravel and Debussy had much in common. They both spent the majority of their working lives in and around Paris. Both were apparently passionate gardeners, not to mention chain smokers. And they both liked to collect knickknacks. Pianist Gwendolyn Mock explains how Ravel's love of collecting sheds light on a fundamental aspect of Ravel's music: pudeur, or restraint.
What really struck me about Ravel's house is that he had an incredible love of knickknacks. He would have a room called the Oriental Room, and he would take his guests into this room, and there would be the most beautiful teacups and embroideries and little paintings and beautiful pillows and Persian things, and I mean, extraordinary things. Then you would go into another room, and it would be the room full of, Biedermeier furniture, incredible chairs, incredible carpets, beautiful cabinets, lamps, an incredible exquisite taste he had. I felt that he surrounded himself with items of beauty, items that were really fragile and delicate, and he loved every single one of them. But you can't love them too much. You can't hug a teacup. You'd crush it. You would break it. And to me, that's a little bit helpful to the idea of pudeur. You can play with beauty, you can approach something with great feeling, but you don't want to overflow.
I think what Mock is saying is that there's a direct parallel between the delicacy of the objects Ravel surrounded himself with and the fastidiousness and care with which he constructed his music. In a way, each note was a fragile antique. What you've been hearing is Mock performing Ravel's Pavan for a Dead Princess, which presents another beautiful surface in a restrained way.
At the age of 24, Ravel wrote the Pavan for a Dead Princess. And you might wonder what kind of title this is. Who would write a Pavan for a dead princess? He made up the title, and he wanted to impress the person to whom he had dedicated it. He wanted to curry favor with one of the most powerful hostesses in the Paris Salon period. Her name is Winneretta Singer. She married the Prince of Polignac, and she became the Princess of Polignac.
Brief aside, Winneretta Singer was an heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune.
And she didn't think much of the piece.
Maybe because it was about a dead princess.
And it is a Pavan which really pays homage to French classical and early Renaissance dances from the 15th century.
This fact alone is one that distinguishes Ravel from Debussy. Ravel, much more than Debussy, was a lifelong student of the past who drew inspiration from old forms.
His teacher Fauré also wrote a Pavan, which is very famous. Let me play a little snippet for you. What you'll notice about this Pavan is this short staccato, pizzicato kind of accompaniment with this beautiful, mournful melody. It's basically a stately dance, one with great dignity, one that's very contained. Ravel's Pavan, very similar to Fauré's Pavan, has this little staccato accompaniment with a beautiful melody. So you'll hear the similarities between them immediately as I demonstrated to you. Something about Ravel's music, which I think many people don't understand, is that it is very, very reserved. Many people really thought Ravel was quite aloof, perhaps even cold, but in fact he wasn't. He was a very devoted, very loyal friend. And he had very strong emotional feelings, which he kept to himself. The Pavan is really one of the most difficult pieces to play because of that incredible balance between emotion and reserve. One thing that I'll always remember Vlado Perlmer just saying to me about this piece is don't make a drama out of the piece. This is not a drama queen moment. And the beauty of the music is in everything that you don't do. You feel it, but you don't do it.
Like Debussy's Clair de Lune, the Pavan sounds simple, and yet that's part of what makes it so difficult.
The devil is really in the details. In Ravel's music, everything is about detail.
In music and in life, apparently.
One of the funniest things I read about Ravel was that he was a clothes horse. And I went to the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, where they made me a copy of a bill of sale of clothing that Ravel had purchased in one go. Unbelievable. He had 4 waistcoats, 6 suits, 10 pairs of socks, a couple of unbelievable silk scarves. I mean, he was made for LA. I mean, the guy would love Rodeo Drive. And he once held up an entire concert because he had the wrong socks, and he had to go back to the hotel, put on the right socks, and then come back. And that's how he picked his colors for orchestration.
So let's look at a couple of ways in which fine detail comes into the score. First, Ravel gives a paradoxical instruction at the top of the piece.
It says, assez doux, mais d'une sonorité large, which means very, very soft, gentle, but with a very grand, deep sound. Now that might seem a bit contraindicated. To me, it's not. I feel that when I play this beginning of this melody, you really want that sound to be all enveloping, but not too loud.
Now let's just focus on what a couple fingers in the right hand are doing.
Not too much movement in the wrist, but just a little more at the joint of the finger. You'll achieve that sound. You see what I mean? If I do it with too much wrist, it becomes heavy. If I do it with not enough weight, it becomes, you disappear. It's not consistent. So you really want to get the level of your wrist to the point where you can actually pull the finger away a little bit this way, and that you can actually create a consistent staccato. And then I would practice the bass, a little bit sticky, little delay on each note. I mean, I almost feel like I'm in a jazz club and I'm playing with this great bass player and he's just plucking these strings and letting them ring a little bit. So you put the two together, you have this delicious, slightly shorter staccato with a slightly longer bass.
And then you add the melody on top of that to get the full texture. This is just the work that goes into creating the right feeling in the first two measures of the piece. It's no wonder that Stravinsky is known for calling Ravel the Swiss watchmaker because of his quest for technical perfection. For performer, that quest is as much a part of Ravel's blisteringly fast music as it is for his gentle and slow music. Now that we've gotten a taste of both Ravel and Debussy through Clair de Lune and the Pavan, I want to try to compare their approaches and contributions more directly. And the way that we'll do that is by showing how they approached the same mythical subject, Ondine.
Ondine, the water nymph, was a fantastic protagonist for Debussy. Ondine, the mermaid, Ondine, the fascinating, the irresistible, the one who you have to obey, you have to follow, the seduction of Ondine and the danger of Ondine being a siren, seducing all the sailors by her beautiful song and then cause their death or whatever.
Both Ravel and Debussy were drawn to fairy tales, which they plumbed in many of their works. The basic myth of Ondine is that she's a beautiful nymph who lives underwater and seduces mortal men to come live with her. But when they do, they drown. Debussy drew inspiration from the illustrations of Arthur Rackham and used Ondine as the title of one of the preludes he published in 1912. The piece begins in a classic Debussy way, with evocative harmony that creates a very distinct mood.
I believe it's very early in the morning. Everything is still. Nothing moves, only the water a little bit. And we can feel this... Everything is quiet. And then all of a sudden, what is it?
Before we get deeper, let's see how Ravel starts off his version of Ondine. First, it's important to note that Ravel is working from different material. This is pianist Noam Sivan.
Ondine is the first movement in the trilogy Gaspard de la Nuit, Treasurer of the Night, which Ravel composed based on 3 poems by Aloysius Bertrand. The poem about Ondine is divided into 5 stanzas. At first, Ondine, the mermaid, presents herself in all her glory.
Ravel wrote Ondine in 1906, 6 years before Debussy wrote his Ondine. Here's how Ravel begins. This is Vlado Perlmutter performing.
There's stillness, there's hypnosis in it.
This is the pianist Ina Faliks.
There's something shimmering and something that's very fragile in a way, but it's full of notes.
In the opening, the 30-second notes depict water. The asymmetrical grouping of 2-3-3 and the flat 6 in the harmony both contribute to a surreal atmosphere.
What Sivan is saying is that Ravel uses an off-kilter rhythmic pattern to imitate the play of water. Then, his point about this flat sixth refers to the fact that 3 out of the 4 notes that we're hearing at the beginning make up the major chord of C sharp. But Ravel adds a 4th note, that flat 6, which throws off the simplicity of the major chord. It's like Ravel's highlighting, hey, there's something else going on here. Something insidious. Ravel and Debussy use very different textures, but both create a vivid, watery scene. Both make me think of sitting by the edge of a pond, getting lost in the reflections on its surface. As we get to Ondine's entrance into the piece, we reach another point of comparison between Ravel and Debussy. This is back to Debussy's Ondine.
And the song of Ondine is the most fascinating song on earth. And here we are to adore her.
The siren song of Ondine is special in at least one way. It's in the Lydian mode. Debussy and Ravel are both known for their extension of harmony and their departure from the traditional sounds of major and minor scales. What Debussy uses instead of any of these scales is the Lydian mode, which takes the basic major scale and raises the 4th. Raising the 4th note in the scale creates something strange out of the familiar. What we hear sounds almost normal, but not quite, and that's fascinating.
Here she is, Ondine, making a little bit submarine dance. She is a mermaid and we can see her moving.
Although Ravel technically wrote his Ondine before Debussy, he was following Debussy's footsteps, constantly playing with harmony to create new sonic effects. Here's the entry of Ondine's song in Ravel's version.
The harmonic language of Ondine is the language of extended tonality. We have chords with an added flat 6. We have chords of 7th and 9th. We have chords of 7th and 13th. We have half diminished chords. We have whole tone chords. Many chords that were later used in jazz.
Debussy was the original pioneer of this kind of extended tonality. Here's an example from later in Debussy's Ondine. Listen to how jazzy it can sound, and yet it predated jazz by decades.
French music has its own pace and direction.
One of the reasons that Debussy and later Ravel were so important is that they used harmony for a different purpose than the great German masters who came before them. Though, of course, there are exceptions. Think about how Brahms, for example, would use dissonant harmony to bring you to the precipice of crisis, to make you die for resolution. This is from the Brahms D minor concerto that we looked at in episode 2. And here, harmony is all about creating the drama. But Debussy and Ravel used harmony not just to create tension and resolution, to create a storyline, but also to create color.
This incredible sensation of synesthesia that all the senses are just mingling together. Each chord has got a bouquet. Each chord has got a color.
One reason that many refer to Ravel and Debussy as impressionist composers, even though Debussy avoided the term, is that they were able to use certain tools, and especially nuances of harmony, to paint a vivid picture.
Debussy can tell you where we are, what is the time, what is the landscape.
Both Debussy and Ravel paid close attention to the material world. Think of their shared love of collecting. One of their major contributions was to rethink what music could be, drawing it away from being a vehicle for delivering moral messages, and toward creating a vivid, sensuous experience.
In Germany, people saying about Beethoven, it must not be beautiful because it's not the main virtue of it. It should have the truth and the hardship of the truth. This will never work for Chopin and for Debussy because before anything else, they must be very beautiful and the sound of the piano must be very beautiful.
Undine is a great example of Debussy and Ravel's attention to the sensual world. They aren't so much telling the story of Undine as evoking it with harmonies and textures that give us a vivid sense of place.
In Undine, we have a long melody which seems almost endless. And it continues on and on.
I think that the idea of a long, long line, a line that's not broken, is important in Undine. When you look at the ocean and you see the ocean move and the waves coming in, it's hypnotic and you can't look away. And why is that? I think it's because there's that sense of infinity, of continuity.
One of the main differences between Debussy and Ravel is the sense for long melodies. Ravel can write just one movement, one melody, or even just one piece, one melody. You'll never find it for Debussy. But on the other hand, the fragmental melodies of Debussy's are memorable.
I can attest. Since working on this episode, I've had the Debussy Undine song stuck in my head for days. In both Debussy's and Ravel's Undine, the pieces progress into a sensuous world of changing colors and textures, but eventually, each gets to a moment of struggle. Undine wants the mortal man to come with her.
A real drama will develop because Undine is insisting. But also we are insisting not to come with her. And she says, you have to come with me. And I say, no, I don't want to come with you. And here is a real, incredible world war.
The struggle sounds very different in Ravel's Undine, and that's driven by the poem on which it's based.
This is Undine's hushed invitation to the man to become her husband and visit her underwater palace. And now we have the only moment in the piece which is an unaccompanied melody. This is the only human reply. The man replies that he is in love with a mortal woman. Suddenly we have a naked melody. When Undine hears that, she gets angry, she laughs, and then she disappears. We have a cadenza-like passage. Leaving drops of water on the man's window.
These works are full of word painting. So in other words, Ravel takes certain things in the poem and brings them to life in the score, in the music, but that's very personal, and we don't have proof of it. It's not like he said, well, this is where the green algae turns up, and this is where, the father is beating the water with a branch. That's not what happens. So we have to rely on our imagination. We have to rely on how we hear sound before we make it, our physical relationship with the piano, and just this amazing union of the instrument, our heart, our mind, and our ear.
I'm telling a story, but this story is not mandatory. If one of us feels that this is Undine and this is the viewer and this is a Salery, it's up to us. We can just relate any programmatic story to this fantastic music.
We began this episode with Clair de Lune and with Ravel's Pavan, asking basically, why do we care? What's so special about the music of these two composers? If the 19th century was the German century for classical music, many have argued that it was Debussy whose music most influenced the 20th century. Bartók, Messiaen, Stravinsky, and Ravel were all directly influenced by the French composer's exploration of the limits of tonality and the possibilities of texture. Even jazz musicians like Bill Evans credit Debussy for their sound. Diving deeper into Debussy and Ravel makes me wonder, who will define the 21st century's art music? If Debussy and Ravel expanded our notion of color, harmony, texture, what will this century's innovators do? For now, though, let's bring it full circle, coming back to Debussy and the seismic changes his thinking precipitated in music. This is Arie Vardi, playing Debussy's Undine. Oh, and just a quick thing. If you liked this episode, please give us a like or a follow on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Okay, enjoy, and see you next time. In this episode, you heard excerpts from interviews with Arie Vardi, Gwendolyn Mach, Jean-Efflam Bavouzet, Ina Faliks, and Noam Sivan. Join us next time for some appreciation of one of the unsung heroes of piano playing, our feet. If you thought there were a lot of divergent opinions about rubato, just wait for how many there are about pedaling. See you then.